Before you decide that your life went wrong, listen to a truth that heaven has been trying to speak over your pain. Maybe you have looked back at your story and quietly wondered if God made a mistake with you. A loss you did not deserve, a door that closed in your face, a prayer that seemed to fall into silence, a season so painful that you began to believe your life had lost its meaning. If that is you, hear this before you go any further. God does not make mistakes, not with the world and not with you. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, we read these words, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Read it slowly. It does not say that all things are good, it says that in all things God is working. This is not a soft sentence for easy days. It is a lifeline for the night when your mind cannot find a reason, but your soul still needs a place to rest. Even in the loss, even in the silence, even in the part of your story you would erase if you could. Because behind what your eyes call chaos, there are hands you cannot see, forming something you cannot yet understand. And Scripture gives us an image for this. Not only a king on a throne, but a potter at his wheel. Isaiah says, "We are the clay, you are the potter, we are all the work of your hand." Think of a potter at his wheel. He takes a shapeless lump of clay. He presses it. He turns it. He pushes his thumbs deep into the center of it until it feels like the clay is being crushed. To the clay, it may feel like the end. But the potter is not destroying it. He is shaping it. The pressure is not against the clay. The pressure is forming the vessel. And this is what God has been doing in the very place where you thought he had walked away. You are not a mistake. You are in the hands of the Master. And as long as he holds you on his wheel, your story is not finished. The delay you resent is not denial. The silence you fear is not abandonment. The desert you are walking is not punishment. It is preparation. The pressure of the Master's hands is not destruction. It is shaping. You are not broken. You are in the hands of the one who has not finished his work. Not every flaw is a mistake. Sometimes it is the place where the Master is forming something new. There is a hidden reason behind what he allowed. You cannot see it yet because you are still inside it. The clay cannot see the vessel while it is being formed. It only feels the turning, the pressure, the strange discomfort of being changed. But the potter can see the finished shape long before the clay can feel it. And that is the mercy hidden inside your pain. God is not reacting to your life. He is not scrambling to fix what fell apart. Before you were ever wounded, he already knew how he would redeem it. Before the door ever closed, he already knew the better one he would open. Nothing about your story has taken him by surprise. And here is the part many believers miss. The wheel is not punishment. The wheel is formation. There is a secret in the hands of the potter. He never presses what he plans to throw away. The pressure itself is proof that he intends to keep you. This does not mean the evil done to you was good. It means that once your pain is placed in his hands, even what was meant to deform you can become material for redemption. What feels like the ruin of your plans may be the protection of your future. What feels like a delay may be perfect timing you cannot yet understand. What feels like the silence of God may be the deepest work he has ever done in you, happening in a place too quiet for you to hear. Before we go any further, subscribe to this channel if you have not yet, so you do not miss the words that can steady your heart in the middle of a season you do not understand. At the end of this message, we will pray together. A prayer of trust, a prayer of surrender, a prayer for the peace that comes when you finally place your broken pieces back into the hands that made you. But before that prayer, we will open Scripture and walk through 7 lives that looked like failure. 7 stories where everything seemed to fall apart, where everyone watching would have said, "This is over." Joseph will show us that betrayal can become the road to a throne. Moses will show us that the desert is not wasted time. Hannah will show us that a delayed answer is not a denied one. A blind man will show us that some pain is not punishment at all. Lazarus will show us that God's too late is often exactly on time. Job will show us that we can trust God even without the answer. And Jesus himself will show us that the cross that looked like the end was the very center of the plan. Here are the 7 lives you must understand if you want to stop calling your story a mistake. And before we enter the first one, write this declaration in the comments. I am not a mistake. I am in the hands of the Master. Write it not as a slogan, write it as a decision before heaven. But before we walk through the 7 lives, I want you to see why this image of the potter matters. Because it is not only a picture, it is a place God himself chose to teach it. In Jeremiah chapter 18, God sent the prophet down to the potter's house. And there, Jeremiah watched a vessel become marred in the potter's hands. It went wrong on the wheel, it lost its shape. By every appearance, it was a failure. But the potter did not throw it away. He took the same clay and he formed it again into another vessel, as it seemed good to him to make it. And then God spoke the words that hold this whole message together. Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand. Hear what that means for you. The vessel was marred, but it was still in the hands of the potter. And what remains in his hands can always be made again. Your life may feel marred right now. It may feel like something went wrong on the wheel, but you have not been thrown away. You are still in his hands, and that changes everything. You are not discarded clay, you are unfinished clay. The first life that looked like failure is the life of Joseph. There are seasons when the deepest wound does not come from a stranger, it comes from the people who were supposed to love you. Joseph knew that wound. He was a young man with a dream from God, a dream of a future so large that even he did not fully understand it. But his own brothers hated him for it. They took his coat, they threw him into a pit, they sold him like an object to strangers traveling to a foreign land. Imagine what he must have thought as the caravan carried him away from everything he knew. The dream had promised him honor, and now he was a slave. Where was God in that pit? Where was God on that road? If God had given him the dream, why had God allowed the betrayal? And it did not stop there. In Egypt, Joseph did what was right, and he was punished for it. He refused to sin, and he was thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit. Year after year passed behind those walls. The dreamer was forgotten. The one who once wore a coat of many colors now wore the chains of an innocent man. If anyone had the right to say, God made a mistake with my life, it was Joseph. But heaven was not confused. While Joseph sat in prison, God was arranging a nation. While Joseph waited, a famine was coming that would one day drive his own brothers to their knees before him. Every injustice he suffered was quietly positioning him for the moment God had prepared before the foundation of the world. To people, Joseph looked forgotten. To heaven, he was being positioned. And when that moment came, Joseph was lifted from the prison to the palace in a single day. The slave became a ruler. The forgotten prisoner became the second most powerful man in Egypt. And when his brothers finally stood before him, trembling, expecting revenge, Joseph spoke words that still echo through every broken life. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Hear this carefully. Joseph did not say the betrayal was good. He said God took what was meant for evil and wove it into good. The pit was not the end, it was the road. The prison was not the end, it was the waiting room of a promise. What his brothers meant to destroy him, God used to position him. And perhaps you are living your own version of the pit right now. You were betrayed by someone you trusted. You did the right thing and were punished for it. You have been forgotten in a place that feels like a prison, watching the years pass while the dream seems to fade. But listen, the same God who was working behind the walls of Joseph's cell is working behind the walls of yours. You are not being buried, you are being planted. What looks like the end of your story may be the exact place where God is preparing your elevation. And notice this, Joseph did not become bitter in the pit. He did not let the injustice turn his heart to stone. Even as a slave, even as a prisoner, he stayed faithful, he stayed soft, he stayed useful in the hands of God. That is why, when the moment came, he was ready to be lifted. The years of waiting had not destroyed him. They had prepared him. They had built in him a character strong enough to carry the honor that was coming. Because this is the pattern you must understand. God often prepares in secret what he plans to use in public. The pit and the prison were the hidden years, the years no one applauded, the years that looked like a waste. But those were the years God was forming the man. If Joseph had been given the palace at 17, his pride would have destroyed him. God let the wound come first, so that the greatness, when it arrived, would not undo him. So do not despise your hidden years. Do not curse the season when no one sees you and nothing seems to move. The Master is doing his deepest work in the place that feels most forgotten. Joseph's story was not a failure. God was writing a different story. If this truth is strengthening you, let this message reach someone who feels forgotten. But betrayal is not the only place where people call their story a mistake. Sometimes the pain is not what others did to you. Sometimes it is the years you think you wasted. The second life that looked like failure is the life of Moses. There are seasons when it feels like your best years are being spent on nothing. You had a calling, you had fire, you believed God was going to use you, and then somehow you ended up far from where you thought you would be, doing something small, in a place no one important would ever notice. Moses knew that season. He was born for deliverance, raised in a palace, educated in the wisdom of the most powerful nation on earth. He felt the pull of his calling early. He knew he was meant to set his people free. But when he tried to do it in his own strength, everything collapsed. He made a terrible mistake, and he ran. He fled into the wilderness, and there, in the middle of nowhere, the prince became a shepherd. 40 years. 40 years watching sheep on the backside of a desert. 40 years of ordinary days under an ordinary sky. If you had met Moses at year 20 of that desert, you would have seen a man whose dream had died. The palace was gone. The calling seemed like a memory. Surely, by every human measure, his life had become a failure. But the desert was not a punishment. The desert was a school. In the palace, Moses had learned to be somebody. In the desert, God taught him to be nobody, so that when the time came, it would be clear that the power belonged to God and not to the man. The impatient prince became a patient shepherd. The proud deliverer became a humble servant. God was not wasting those 40 years. He was forming a leader who could shepherd a stubborn nation through the wilderness, because first he had taught that leader how to shepherd sheep. God was not only taking Moses out of Egypt, he was taking Egypt out of Moses. And that second work is always the slower one. It is easy to leave a place. It is much harder to let God change what that place put inside you. So he took his time, and he was not wasting a single day of it. And maybe you have carried this question for 20 years, not 20 days. Maybe you look back on long seasons and grieve them as lost. But no season surrendered to God is ever lost. He redeems the years the way he redeems everything else, quietly, patiently, forming in the wasted time the very thing your future will need. And then one ordinary day, in that same desert, a bush caught fire and did not burn. And the voice of God called Moses by name. The calling that seemed dead was alive. It had only been waiting for the man to be ready. God was never late. He was preparing. So if you feel like your years are being spent in obscurity, hear this. The hidden season is not the end of your calling. It is the shaping of it. The desert where you feel forgotten may be the exact place where God is teaching you the very things your future will require. You are not off the path. You are on the potter's wheel. And the slow turning you cannot understand is doing a work that speed never could. And here is what should comfort you most. The failure that sent Moses into the desert did not disqualify him. He had tried to force the calling in his own strength, and it had ended in disaster. He must have believed for 40 years that he had ruined the plan of God for his life, that his one mistake had closed the door forever. But the door was not closed. It was only waiting. God did not throw away the vessel because it had been marred by a young man's impatience. He simply took it back to the wheel and formed it again, more slowly, more patiently, until it was ready. If you have ever believed that your own mistake has ended your calling, hear this. God is not limited by your failures. He does not discard the people who fall. He restores them. The Moses who ran from Egypt in shame is the same Moses who returned to Egypt in power, because between the two stood a God who does not waste even our worst moments. Moses' story was not a failure. God was writing a different story. The third life that looked like failure is the life of Hannah. There are seasons when you have prayed for the same thing for so long that you have run out of words. You do not even know how to ask anymore. You just ache. And the silence of heaven begins to feel like a verdict. Hannah knew that ache. She longed for a child, and year after year the answer did not come. She watched others receive what she was denied. She endured the cruelty of those who did not understand her pain. Her heart was so heavy that when she went to the house of God to pray, she could not even speak the words. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She wept before the Lord out of the depth of a sorrow that had no language left. To anyone watching, it looked like unanswered prayer. It looked like a woman whose faith had produced nothing. It looked like God had closed his ears. But heaven had not gone silent. Heaven was keeping time. Heaven heard what Hannah could not say out loud. And this is what your aching heart needs to know tonight. Your tears are not disappearing into the floor. They are becoming seed in the hands of God. He does not waste a single one. The prayers you could not finish, the words that dissolved into weeping, the longing too deep for language, heaven received all of it. Maybe your children do not know how many nights you have prayed for them. Maybe no one knows the weight you have carried in silence, the hope you have guarded for years while nothing seemed to change. But God knows. And what looks like silence to you is often the sound of heaven quietly preparing an answer larger than the one you asked for. God was not ignoring Hannah. He was waiting for the right moment, because the son he would give her was not only meant to answer her longing, he was meant to change the history of a nation. Samuel would become one of the greatest prophets Israel ever knew. The delay was not a denial. The delay was because the answer was carrying more weight than Hannah could see. And in time, God remembered her. The son arrived, and the woman who once could not even speak her prayer stood up and sang one of the most beautiful songs of praise in all of Scripture. Her tears were not wasted. They were seeds. Her silence before God was not emptiness. It was the place where her miracle was being formed. So if you are still waiting, still praying, still aching over something that has not come, do not believe the lie that your prayers have fallen into a void. The one who kept Hannah's tears is keeping yours. A delayed answer is not a denied one. Sometimes the answer takes time because the answer is carrying a purpose far larger than the one thing you asked for. You are not being ignored. You are being prepared to hold what you have been asking for. And there is something holy in what Hannah did with her waiting. She did not turn her pain into resentment against God. She turned it into worship before God. When she could not carry it anymore, she did not walk away from the temple. She walked deeper into it. She poured her grief out in the very presence of the one who seemed to be withholding the answer. That is the difference between a heart that breaks toward God and a heart that breaks away from him. The same pain can either drive you from his presence or drive you deeper into it. Hannah chose to bring her empty arms to God instead of hiding them from him. And it was there, in that surrendered weeping, that her breakthrough began. Perhaps your waiting has tempted you to stop praying altogether. Perhaps the silence has made you want to close the Bible, to stop asking, to protect your heart by expecting nothing. But do not let the delay pull you away from the only one who can answer. Bring your empty arms to him. Weep before him if you must. Heaven does not despise the honest cry of a waiting heart. It leans in to hear it. Hannah's story was not a failure. God was writing a different story. But what if the pain is not a delayed prayer? What if it is a wound you did nothing to deserve? A hardship the world keeps insisting must somehow be your fault. The fourth life that looked like failure is the life of the man born blind. There are seasons when you carry a pain you did nothing to deserve, and the world around you keeps searching for what you did wrong, as if every wound must be a punishment, as if every hardship must be your fault. There was a man who had been blind since the day he was born. He had never seen the sky, never seen a face, never seen the light. And when the disciples of Jesus saw him, their first question was not about mercy. It was about blame. They asked, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" They assumed his suffering was a verdict. They assumed someone had made a mistake, and this was the price. But Jesus answered with words that break the chains of that lie. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Stop and hold that. His blindness was not a punishment. It was not a mistake. It was a canvas. Long before that day, God had allowed a hardship that would one day become the very stage on which his power would be revealed. And then Jesus did something strange and beautiful. He bent down to the ground, and he made clay. He mixed the dust of the earth with his own touch, and he placed it on the man's eyes. The very ground that we are all formed from became the tool of the miracle. And when the man washed, for the first time in his life, he could see. Do you see the picture? The master reached down into the dirt, and he formed something. And a life that everyone had written off as a punishment became a testimony that people are still telling 2,000 years later. Some of what you have carried is not discipline. It is not the consequence of your failure. It is the place where God plans to display his work. The very thing you have been ashamed of may become the platform where his power is revealed. So stop letting the world tell you that your pain is proof that you did something wrong. Sometimes the hardest thing in your life is not a punishment at all. It is a canvas waiting for the hands of the master. Stop calling punishment what Jesus called a canvas. Some pain is not a verdict against you. It is a place where God plans to be seen. Jesus did not celebrate the man's suffering. He revealed that suffering would not have the final word. And think about how long that man waited for his answer. He was not healed as a child. He was not healed as a young man. He lived his entire life in darkness, and every single year of it must have felt meaningless. Every year, someone probably reminded him that his blindness was surely a punishment for something. Every year, the shame was pressed a little deeper. But God was not late, and God was not absent. He had appointed a day. On that day, on a particular road, at a particular hour, the light of the world would walk by and stop, and a lifetime of darkness would become a lifetime of testimony. The man did not know it, but every year of his suffering had been building toward a single moment when the works of God would be revealed in him for all the world to see. You may be carrying something you have carried for a very long time, a limitation, a wound, a weakness that is never lifted, no matter how hard you prayed. And you may have decided that it means God is punishing you, or that he has passed you by. But what if the very thing you have been ashamed of the longest is the thing God plans to use the most? What if your darkest place is simply waiting for the day the light walks by? The blind man's story was not a failure. God was writing a different story. If this truth is beginning to reach a place in you that has believed your pain was your fault, write in the comments right now, "My pain is not my punishment. God is writing a different story." Let that reach another soul who has carried shame for a wound they never chose. The fifth life that looked like failure is the life of Lazarus. There are seasons when the help you were promised seems to arrive too late. You prayed, you waited, you believed God would move in time, and he did not. The worst thing happened anyway, and now you are standing at a place that feels final, wondering why God did not come when you needed him. The sisters of Lazarus knew that feeling. Their brother was sick, and they sent word to Jesus, whom they loved and who loved them. They were certain he would come quickly, but he did not. He stayed where he was for 2 more days, and in that time, Lazarus died. By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. It was over. The mourning had begun. And both sisters said the same aching sentence. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." If only you had come sooner. If only you had not waited. Why were you late? But Jesus was not late. He was never late. He had waited on purpose. He said something that no one understood in the moment. "This sickness will not end in death. It is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." The delay was not neglect. The delay was so that a greater work could be revealed. A healing would have been a mercy, but a resurrection would be a revelation. God allowed the situation to move past the point of human hope, so that when he acted, no one could mistake it for anything but the power of God. And then Jesus stood before the tomb and called out, "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man walked out of the grave. Sometimes what feels like God arriving too late is God preparing to do something greater than what you first asked for. You wanted the sickness healed. He was planning to show you resurrection. You wanted the door kept open. He was planning to open a better one. You wanted rescue before the loss. He was planning to prove that even the loss is not beyond his reach. Maybe the doctor gave a report you never wanted to hear. Maybe someone you loved walked away. Maybe a door closed after years of hope, and it felt like God had come too late to matter. But hold on. The story that looks finished to you may only be paused in the hands of a God who has never once been late in all of history. So if you are standing in front of something that feels 4 days dead, something you believe God waited too long to save, do not close the story. Heaven does not measure time the way fear does. What looks like too late to you may be exactly on time to him. And do not miss what Jesus did before he raised his friend. The Bible tells us that he wept. He knew the miracle was coming. He knew that in a few moments Lazarus would walk out of that grave. And still he wept, because he was not indifferent to the pain of the sisters. He was not cold in the delay. This is what your heart needs to know. The waiting of God is not the coldness of God. Even when he allows you to walk all the way through the loss, he is not standing far off, unmoved. He weeps with you in the delay. He feels the weight of your grief even as he holds the plan you cannot see. His timing may confuse you, but his heart never abandons you. There is a kind of trust that can only be born when the situation moves past the point of human hope. As long as there is something you can do, you lean on your own strength. But when it is 4 days dead, when there is nothing left to try, that is where resurrection faith begins. That is where you finally learn that your rescue was never in your own hands. It was always in his. Lazarus' story was not a failure. God was writing a different story. But there is a deeper valley still. It is the place where you stop asking God to fix it and start asking him why he allowed it at all. The place where you no longer want a solution as much as you want a reason. The sixth life that looked like failure is the life of Job. There are seasons of loss so heavy that you are not even asking for a solution anymore. You are only asking for a reason. You look at what has happened, and the only word that fills your mind is why. Why this? Why me? Why now? And the silence where the answer should be feels unbearable. Job knew that silence. In a single stretch of time, he lost almost everything a person can lose. His wealth was gone. His health was gone. His children were gone. He sat in the ashes, scraping his wounds, a man who had done nothing to deserve the ruin that had fallen on him. His friends came and gave him answers, but their answers were wrong. They told him he must have sinned. They tried to explain his pain with formulas that did not fit. And his own wife told him to give up on God entirely. Job did not receive an explanation. That is the part we often miss. Through all his suffering, God never handed Job a neat reason for why it happened. But in the middle of the darkness, before any answer came, Job said something that reveals the deepest kind of faith. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That is trust without the answer. That is faith that does not depend on understanding. Job decided that even if he never learned the reason, God was still worthy of his trust. And when God finally spoke, he did not give Job a list of explanations. He gave Job himself. He revealed his majesty, his wisdom, his power to hold the whole universe. And something changed in Job that was deeper than any answer. At the end, Job said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." The suffering did not destroy him. It brought him into a knowing of God he could never have reached in comfort. This is one of the hardest and holiest truths of all. Sometimes God does not give you the reason. Sometimes he gives you himself, which is better than the reason. Because a reason would satisfy your mind for a moment, but His presence steadies your soul forever. Sometimes God does not answer the question why, because He is answering a deeper question you did not know you were asking. Who is with me in this? And the answer to that question is the only one strong enough to carry you through what you cannot understand. He is with you. That is the answer beneath every unanswered why. So if you are in a season where the why will not come, hear this. You may not receive the explanation you are begging for, but you can still receive the one who holds it. And when you have seen God in the middle of your pain, you will no longer need to see the reason, because you will have found something greater than an answer. You will have found Him. Maybe the house is quiet now. Maybe the people who filled it are gone, or far away, or simply no longer the way they once were. And in that quiet, your heart is still loud with questions no one else hears. But you are not as alone as the silence makes you feel. The same God who sat with Job in the ashes is sitting with you in the stillness. You do not have to have the answer to have His presence. And notice how the story ends. After all the loss, after all the silence, Job was restored. Scripture says the Lord gave him twice as much as he had before. But even that is not the deepest part of his restoration. The deepest part is that Job came out of his suffering knowing God in a way he never had before the pain. He said it himself. Before, he had only heard about God. Now he had seen Him. The comfort of his old life had given him information about God, but the furnace of his loss gave him intimacy with God. And Job would tell you, if he could, that what he gained in the darkness was worth more than everything he lost. This is the hidden reason so many of us miss. Sometimes God allows what we cannot understand not to take something from us, but to give us something we could never have received any other way. A shallow faith becomes a deep one. A borrowed belief becomes our own. And a God we only knew about becomes a God we have actually met. You may never get your answer on this side of heaven, but you can come out of your pain knowing Him. And one day you will understand that this was the greater gift all along. Job's story was not a failure. God was writing a different story. The seventh life that looked like failure is the life of Jesus Himself. All the other stories lead us here. Joseph's pit, Moses' desert, Hannah's tears, the blind man's darkness, Lazarus's tomb, Job's ashes. Each one teaches us that what looks like the end is not the end. But there is one story deeper than all of them, one moment that looked like the greatest failure in the history of the world: the cross. Think of how it appeared to everyone who watched. The one who healed the sick was dying. The one who raised the dead could not save himself. He was betrayed by a friend, abandoned by his followers, mocked by the crowd, and nailed to a Roman cross like a criminal. The sky went dark. He cried out, and then he died. His body was placed in a tomb, and a heavy stone was rolled across the entrance. If anyone had looked only with human eyes, they would have said, "This is the end. This was a mistake. It all came to nothing." The disciples scattered. The women wept. Every promise seemed buried in that tomb. Friday was real. The blood was real. The grave was real. The silence of that Saturday was real. But it was not final. Because what looked like the greatest defeat was actually the greatest victory ever won. The cross was not an accident. It was not a plan that fell apart. It was the center of everything God had purposed since the beginning of the world. The suffering was not a mistake. It was the doorway to salvation. What looked like the death of hope was the birth of redemption for all humanity. And then came Sunday morning. The stone was rolled away. The tomb was empty. Death itself had been defeated. What the world had called a failure, heaven had called a triumph. This is the truth that holds all the others together. If God can take the cross, the darkest and most unjust moment in all of history, and make it the source of salvation for the world, then there is nothing in your life beyond His reach. There is no betrayal He cannot redeem, no desert He cannot use, No delay he cannot justify, no wound he cannot turn into a testimony, no tomb he cannot open. The cross tells you that God is never more at work than in the moment that looks most like defeat. And think of the disciples during that long, silent Saturday. They were living in the space between the promise and its fulfillment. Jesus had told them he would rise, but grief had made them forget. Fear had made hope feel impossible. They sat in that terrible pause, certain that everything had ended, not knowing that the greatest miracle in history was only hours away. You may be living in your own Saturday right now. Friday has already happened. The loss is real, the pain is real, and Sunday has not yet come. You are in the silence between what God promised and what you can see, and that silence feels like abandonment. But silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is the very place where God is doing the work no human eye can measure. While the disciples grieved, heaven was moving. While the world thought Jesus was defeated, redemption was unfolding in a realm they could not see. So do not judge your whole story by the darkness of Friday or the silence of Saturday. You serve the God of Sunday morning. He is the God who works behind sealed stones, the God who brings life exactly where everyone else has already declared the end. Jesus' story was not a failure. God was writing a different story. He always was. You have seen the 7 lives that looked like failure. Take a breath. We are moving from revelation to practice, from seeing the truth to learning how to live it. Because it is one thing to believe that God does not make mistakes. It is another thing to keep believing it while you are still in the middle of the season you do not understand. The clay does not shape itself. Someone must remain at the wheel, willing to be formed, willing to stay soft, willing to trust the hands that press and turn what feels like ruin into something whole. Because there is a difference between clay that fights the wheel and clay that rests on it. The clay that resists, that hardens, that pulls against the hands cannot be shaped. It only cracks. But the clay that stays soft, that yields to the pressure, that trusts the turning even when it does not understand it, becomes a vessel of honor. The same pressure that breaks a resistant heart forms a surrendered one. So the question is not whether the wheel will turn, it will. The question is whether you will stay soft in the hands of God while it does. Whether you will trust Him in the very season you are tempted to run from. This is where faith becomes real, not in the words you say when everything is easy, but in the way you respond when the pressure comes. These next words are not religious rules. They are the movements of a heart that wants to remain in the hands of the Master while He works. Here are 7 ways to stay on the wheel when you cannot see what He is making. The first way is this: speak life over the clay. The clay does not decide what it will become, but the words you speak over your life will shape what you believe about the hands that hold you. There are people who love God, yet every day they call themselves ruined. They say, "My life is a waste, I am too broken, God has forgotten me." Their own mouth becomes a hammer against the vessel God is forming. But Proverbs chapter 18 verse 21 tells us that death and life are in the power of the tongue. This does not mean you deny your pain. It means you refuse to let despair be the only voice narrating your story. So when fear says, "You are finished," answer, "I am not a mistake, I am in the hands of the Master." When shame says, "You are beyond repair," answer, "You are not broken, you are in the hands of the one who has not finished his work." Do not repeat the words that pain taught you, repeat the words that heaven declares over you. There will be days when your voice trembles as you say it anyway. There will be mornings when the promise feels 1,000 miles away. Speak it anyway. You are not trying to sound powerful. You are teaching your own soul to agree with God until your heart remembers what is true. The first secret of the clay is your voice. What you speak in faith can keep your heart soft on the wheel. The second way is this: see the vessel, not the lump. When the potter looks at a shapeless piece of clay, he does not see what it is, he sees what it will become. He has already imagined the finished vessel before his hands have made the first turn. You must learn to look at your life the same way. The world teaches you to judge everything by what you can see right now, and right now you may see only the unfinished, the broken, the incomplete. But faith looks further. Faith sees with the eyes of the Master. Do not draw your final conclusions in the middle of the shaping. What looks like a formless mess to you may be a masterpiece in the mind of God. The season you are in is not the finished work, it is the process. So when you look at your life and see only what is missing, ask God to let you see what He sees. Ask Him to sanctify your gaze so that you stop staring at the lump and start trusting the hands. The world will always ask you to judge your life by the visible. But the visible is only the surface, and the surface is not the whole truth. Beneath what you can see, God is arranging things you cannot see. Learn to say, even when your eyes see nothing changing, God is working, even now, even here. Faith is not pretending the lump is a vessel. Faith is trusting the one whose hands are still on it. The second secret of the clay is your sight. When you see with the eyes of the Master, hope returns. The third way is this. Remember the marks His hands have already made. Every vessel carries the memory of the hands that shaped it. And your life already carries the fingerprints of God, if only you will remember them. Think back. There were times you thought you would not survive, and you did. There were doors you thought would never open, and they did. There were nights you thought would break you, and you are still here. Those were not accidents. Those were the hands of the Master, already at work in your story. The enemy wants you to forget. He knows that a heart with a short memory panics quickly, so keep a record. Write down, even in a few words, the moments God carried you. When the next dark season comes, read them again, and let your soul remember that the same hands that shaped you before have not stopped shaping you now. Gratitude is not a decoration, it is a weapon against despair. It anchors your soul to the faithfulness of God when your feelings want to drift. And gratitude changes what you expect. A heart that remembers how many times God has already come through learns to wait for Him with hope instead of fear. When you can look back and see His fingerprints on every season you survived, you can look ahead and believe He will not abandon the vessel He has carried this far. The God of your yesterdays is the God of your right now, and He has not changed His mind about you. The third secret of the clay is your memory. When you remember His hands, you can trust them again. The fourth way is this. Do not measure your clay against another's vessel. Every vessel a potter makes is different. Some are made for honor, some for daily use, some are tall and some are small. And a wise vessel does not resent its shape by staring at the one beside it. But this is where so many hearts lose their peace. You look at another person's life, their marriage, their success, their open doors, their season of blessing, and you begin to believe that God has done more for them than for you. And that comparison quietly poisons your trust. God's work in your life is personal. It is not a copy of anyone else's. What He is forming in you is shaped for a purpose only you can carry. The timing of another person's harvest takes nothing away from the harvest God is preparing for you. So take your eyes off the other vessels. Keep them on the Master's hands. What He is making of you is not late, and it is not less. It is yours. Comparison will always lie to you about the timing of God. It will show you someone else's harvest and hide their hidden years. It will show you the finished vessel on the shelf and never show you the pit, the desert, the tears, the fire that person passed through to get there. You are comparing your unfinished middle to someone else's finished result, and it will steal your peace every time. Trust that the Master knows what He is doing with your clay. He is not distracted. He has not forgotten you while He works on someone else. His hands are on your life at this very moment, shaping something that will fit no one else's purpose but your own. The fourth secret of the clay is peace. When you stop comparing, you stop striving, and you begin to rest. The fifth way is this: stay near hands that shape, not hands that break. The clay on the wheel is soft, and soft things take the shape of whatever presses against them. That is why it matters whose influence you allow closest to your heart. There are voices that build you and voices that break you. There are people who strengthen your faith and people who feed your doubt. And in a fragile season, the wrong voices can do more damage than the trial itself. This is not about pride, it is about protection. You cannot afford to let hands that only tear at you get close to the vessel God is still forming. Surround yourself with people who point you back to the Master, who remind you of his promises, who lift your faith instead of draining it. Guard the company of your soul the way a potter guards the clay from careless hands. What you let near your heart shapes what your heart becomes. The fifth secret of the clay is company. Stay near what builds you, and you will not be so easily broken. The sixth way is this: do not climb off the wheel. There is a moment in the shaping when the clay is turning fast and the pressure is strong, and it feels like it will never end. And in that moment, everything in you wants to escape. You want to rush the process, to force the outcome, to get off the wheel before the work is done. But the vessel is never finished in the middle of the spinning. If the clay leaves the wheel too soon, it stays half-formed. The waiting is not empty. The waiting is where the shaping happens. So do not abandon your season just because it is uncomfortable. Do not walk away from God the day before the breakthrough. Be faithful in the waiting. Keep praying when nothing moves. Keep serving when no one notices. Keep believing when the answer is slow. The one who began the good work in you is faithful to complete it. He does not leave a vessel half-made, but you must stay on the wheel long enough for his hands to finish. The enemy knows this. That is why he works hardest right before the breakthrough. He does not fear the prayer you pray on the first day. He fears the prayer you pray on the hardest day, when nothing has changed and you decide to keep believing anyway. He does not fear the faith that starts with fire. He fears the faith that continues in the dryness, when the feeling is gone and only the trust remains. So when everything in you wants to give up, when the waiting has worn you thin, remember that the vessel is almost finished. The pressure you feel now may be the final shaping before he lifts you from the wheel. Do not quit in the last hour of the work. The sixth secret of the clay is patience. The one who does not climb off the wheel is the one who becomes whole. The seventh way is this: declare his promise while the wheel is still turning. You do not have to wait until the vessel is finished to speak the truth over it. In fact, the most powerful faith declares the promise before it can see the result. While the clay is still shapeless, while the season is still hard, open your mouth and proclaim what God has said. Speak his word out loud in your home, in your car, in the quiet of the night. Not because you already feel it, but because your words are agreeing with heaven before your eyes can see it. Say, God is working, even here. God does not make mistakes, even in this. All things are working together for my good, even this. Let your declaration rise louder than your doubt. Faith comes by hearing, so let your own soul hear the truth again and again until it takes root deeper than the pain. The wheel is still turning. The work is not done, but the promise is already true. Declare it now. This is how the great believers of Scripture stood firm. They did not wait for the circumstances to change before they praised. They praised in the prison, in the storm, in the empty field. They spoke the promise of God over lives that did not yet look like the promise, and heaven honored their faith. You can do the same. You can stand in the middle of your unfinished season and declare that God is faithful, that God is good, and that God does not make mistakes. And that declaration will hold your heart together until your eyes finally catch up to what your faith already knew. The seventh secret of the clay is declaration. What you proclaim in faith before you see it keeps your heart steady until it comes. Now you have heard the 7 ways to stay on the wheel. Speak life over the clay. See the vessel, not the lump. Remember the marks his hands have made. Do not measure your clay against another's vessel. Stay near hands that shape, not hands that break. Do not climb off the wheel. And declare his promise while the wheel is still turning. These 7 ways are simple, but they are not small. They are the quiet habits by which a soul survives a long and confusing season. They are how you remain soft in the hands of God when you cannot understand what he is making. But the deepest truths often enter the heart not through explanation, but through an image. Jesus himself taught in parables because he knew that a story can carry a truth into places where arguments cannot reach. A story stays with you long after the words have ended. It returns when you are awake at night, when you are praying without many words, when you need something to hold. So before we pray together, let me place one image before you. An old workshop, a patient master, a young man who believed he was ruined, and a lump of clay that was never thrown away. Let me tell you the story of the potter who did not throw the clay away. On the edge of a small village, at the end of a dusty road, there was an old workshop. It was not beautiful. The walls were stained with years of dust, the shelves were worn, and the wheel in the center creaked as it turned. But those who passed by at night would sometimes see a warm light in the window, and the shadow of an old man still working long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The potter was old now. His hair had turned white, and his hands were rough and cracked from a lifetime of labor. But there was something in those hands that no one could explain. Clay that others called worthless came alive under his fingers. And there was a peace in his eyes that seemed strange for a man who lived alone, with nothing but earth and water and fire. One evening, as a cold rain fell outside, a young man came to the door. His clothes were soaked, his shoulders were bent, and in his arms he carried a piece of clay he had tried to shape himself. It was lopsided and cracked, pressed too hard in some places and too thin in others. He set it down on the table and looked at the old man with tired eyes. "I made this," he said, "and I ruined it. I have tried and tried, and it only gets worse. I think some things are simply too far gone. I think I am too far gone." The old potter did not answer right away. He picked up the clay and turned it slowly in his hands, feeling its cracks, studying its shape. Then he looked at the young man and said gently, "You are not ruined. You are simply not finished yet." And if an earthly potter knows this about clay, how much more does the Father know this about the soul he made? The young man frowned. "But look at it," he said. "It is broken." "It has not been fired," the old man answered. "It has only been shaped by hands that did not know what they were doing. And clay that has not yet passed through the fire can always be made new. Watch." He dipped his fingers in water and touched the dry clay, and slowly it began to soften again. He placed it in the center of the wheel and he began to turn it. And as the wheel spun, his thumbs pressed deep into the clay, right into the center of it, until it looked as if the whole thing might collapse. The young man flinched. "You are crushing it," he said. The old man smiled without looking up. "No," he said, "I am centering it. Clay cannot be shaped until it learns to rest in the middle of the wheel. What looks like crushing is the beginning of every good vessel." For a while, neither of them spoke. There was only the sound of the rain, the creak of the wheel, and the wet clay rising slowly into shape between the old man's steady hands. Then the potter began to talk, softly, as if to himself. "I was young once," he said, "and I fought against everything. I wanted to understand every pain before I would trust. I demanded answers for every silence. But the day came when I learned to place in God's hands what I could not carry in my own. And on that day, I stopped fighting the wheel, and I let myself be shaped." The young man listened without moving. The old man went on. "There were people who marred me," he said, "voices that lied about me, doors that closed in my face. I could have let bitterness harden my heart until nothing could ever shape it again. But I chose to bless those who hurt me, not because it was easy, but because I did not want to become as hard as the hands that broke me. Bitter clay cannot be shaped, it only cracks in the fire." He wet his fingers again and smoothed the rising walls of the vessel. "And I learned to watch my words," he said. "A soul can speak defeat over itself until it believes it. So I stopped calling myself ruined. I began to speak as a man who belonged to God, even on the days when I felt like nothing but dust." The young man watched the vessel rising, slowly, patiently, between the old man's steady hands. "It takes so long," he said quietly. The potter nodded. "It does. And that was the hardest lesson of all. When I was young, I wanted to be finished. I wanted the shaping done and the waiting over. I did not understand that the slowness was not the master neglecting me. The slowness was the master being careful with me. A vessel rushed off the wheel is a vessel that cracks the first time it is used. He was not slow because he had forgotten me. He was slow because he loved me too much to leave me half-made. The young man looked at the clay, now rising tall and even under the old man's hands, and he whispered, "But what if the clay in me has already dried? What if there is nothing left that can still be made new?" The potter stopped the wheel for a moment and looked at him kindly. "Then we do not curse the clay," he said. "We bring water back to it. I have seen a great deal of clay in my life, clay that others threw away, clay that everyone had given up on. But clay does not become worthless simply because it needs a new form. And a life is not a mistake simply because it is not yet finished. The master does not throw away what he has chosen to shape." Then he set the wheel turning again. "I am not what people once called me," he said quietly. "I am not my failures. I am not the names they gave me in my worst season. I am a son of the one who made me. And when a man knows whose hands he is in, the pressure no longer frightens him. He learns that the hands are not against him, they are forming him." He lifted the finished vessel from the wheel with great care and carried it to the small fire burning in the corner of the room. "Now comes the fire," he said. "Do not be afraid of it. The fire is not the enemy of the clay. Without it, the vessel would stay soft forever and break at the first touch. It is the fire that makes it strong enough to hold water, strong enough to be useful, strong enough to last. What the fire takes away is only the weakness. What it leaves behind is permanent." The young man watched the flames rise around the vessel, and something in his chest, some old hard thing, began to crack. Not like destruction, but like a shell finally breaking open. The storm outside began to soften. The rain grew quiet. And when the vessel had passed through the fire, the old man drew it out and set it on the table between them. It was stronger than before. It was more beautiful than before. And it carried in its finished form no memory of ever having been called ruined. The potter looked at the young man and said one last thing. "My joy," he said, "does not come from perfect clay or easy days. If it did, it would have died long ago. My joy comes from the Master. That is why nothing can take it from me. The world did not give it, so the world cannot steal it. And even on the nights when I feel nothing, when heaven seems silent and the workshop is dark, I still return to the wheel. Because faithfulness does not depend on what I feel. It depends on the one I trust. And those who stay in his hands are the ones who are finally made whole." Before dawn, the young man rose to leave, but he was not the same man who had arrived. He had not been given an explanation for every sorrow. He had not been handed a miracle. But he had been given something deeper, the image of a life still in the hands of the Master. At the door, he looked back once more. The old potter had already returned to the wheel, wetting a new piece of clay, beginning again. Not because the storm had fully passed, but because there was always more to be shaped. And as the young man walked back down the road, the rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to lighten, and in his hands he carried the finished vessel, the one that had passed through the fire, the one that had never been thrown away. You have just heard a story about clay that was never thrown away. But this story is not only about an old potter in a small workshop. It is about your life in the hands of God, in the very season you thought had ruined you. These 7 lives speak now with one voice. Joseph says, "Betrayal can become the road to a throne." Moses says, "The desert is not wasted time." Hannah says, "A delayed answer is not a denied one." The blind man says, "Some pain is not punishment at all." Lazarus says, "God's too late is often exactly on time." Job says, "You can trust him even without the answer." And Jesus says, "The cross that looked like the end was the center of the plan." Every one of them looked like a failure while it was happening. Every one of them was God writing a different story. And here is what should steady your soul the most. Not one of these people could see the ending while they were living the middle. Joseph could not see the palace from the prison. Moses could not see the burning bush from the back of the desert. Hannah could not see her son through her tears. None of them knew, in the middle of the pain, that God was writing something beautiful. They only knew it afterward. You are in your middle right now. You cannot see your ending either. And that is exactly why you must trust the one who can. The same God who was faithful to every one of them is being faithful to you in the part of the story you cannot yet read. Your inability to see the reason does not mean there is no reason. It only means you are still on the wheel. So now you understand. God does not make mistakes, not when he makes you wait, not when he is silent, not when the door closes, not when the answer seems too late, not when the reason never comes, not even when everything you built collapses into what looks like ruin. What you call a mistake, he calls material. What you call broken, he calls unfinished. What you call the end, he calls the wheel, still turning. Scripture says we carry this treasure in jars of clay, so that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. You do not have to be a flawless vessel for God to fill you. You only have to remain in his hands. The cracks you are ashamed of may be the very places his light shines through. You are not ruined. You are still being formed. You are not a mistake. You are in the hands of the Master. And as long as he holds you, your story is not finished. So do not let this message remain only in your mind. Let it descend into your heart. Let it become surrender. Let it become a prayer. And now, let us bow our hearts together in this special prayer. Lord my God, my Maker, the potter of my life and the keeper of my soul, I come before you now with everything I am and everything I am afraid I am not. I bring you the pieces of my story that I have called mistakes, the losses I did not understand, the doors that closed, the prayers that seemed to fall into silence, the seasons so painful that I began to believe my life had gone wrong. I place them all in your hands because I am tired of carrying them alone. Father, I confess that I have looked at my life and doubted your goodness. I have seen only the lump and not the vessel. I have stared at what is broken and forgotten the hands that are still working. Forgive me for calling a mistake what you were quietly forming for my good. Today, I choose to trust you, even when I do not understand. Even when the season is long, I choose to believe you are near. Even when the pressure is heavy, I choose to remember that your hands are not against me. They are shaping me. Teach me to stay on the wheel. Teach me to stop fighting the turning I cannot control. Teach me to say, with faith and not just with my lips, not my will, but yours be done. Where I have grown hard, soften me again. Where bitterness has begun to crack me, wash it away with your grace. I do not want to become as hard as the things that hurt me. Keep my heart soft enough for you to shape. Lord, I give you the names of those who wounded me and the memories that still return in the night. I choose to bless where I was cursed and to release where I was betrayed, not because it was small, but because your freedom is greater than my pain. Purify my words. Too often I have repeated what my pain taught me instead of what your word declares. Fill my mouth with life. Let me speak faith instead of fear, promise instead of defeat, and let me declare your goodness even before I see it. Remind me every day who I am. I am not my failures. I am not the names I was given in my worst season. I am not the season I am in. I am your child. I am held. I am being made. I am not a mistake because I am in the hands of the Master. And Lord, give me eyes to see the fire differently. When the trial comes that I do not understand, help me to remember that the fire is not here to destroy me. It is here to make me strong enough to hold what you are preparing to pour into my life. Do not let me run from the very heat that is making me whole. Where I have compared my life to others, set me free. Let me trust that what you are forming in me is shaped for a purpose only I can carry. Let me stop measuring my clay against another's vessel and rest in the timing of your hands. Give me the grace to wait without giving up. When I feel nothing, help me continue. When I see nothing, help me continue. When the answer is slow and no change appears, help me stay on the wheel and trust the one who has not finished his work. Make my faith deeper than my feelings. Make my trust stronger than my confusion. Root me so deeply in your faithfulness that no delay, no silence, and no closed door can convince me that you have made a mistake. Make my desert a garden. Make my waiting an altar. Make my broken pieces into a vessel that carries your mercy to someone else who is about to give up. And if my story can show another soul that God does not make mistakes, then use it, Lord. Let the very pain I once wanted to erase become a testimony of your faithfulness. Let the vessel you are forming out of my hardest season become proof that nothing placed in your hands is ever wasted. Teach me to trust you in the silence. When you do not explain, help me to believe that you are still good. When you do not answer as quickly as I want, help me to remember that your timing has never once failed. When I cannot feel your hands, help me to know that they have never left the clay. I lay down my need to understand everything. I lay down my demand for reasons. I choose instead to know the one who holds the reasons, and to trust that what you allow, you will one day redeem. Nothing you have permitted in my life is wasted in your hands. I give you my life again, not the finished version, the unfinished one, the one still on the wheel, the one still being shaped. I trust the hands that hold me. Let Romans chapter 8 verse 28 become more than a verse I quote. Let it become the ground beneath my feet when I cannot understand what your hands are doing. When my eyes see only chaos, let my heart still say that in all things you are working, and that you are working for my good. And even if the season is long, even if the answer is slow, even if I never understand this side of heaven why you allowed what you allowed, let this remain true within me. You do not make mistakes. You never have, and you never will. I am not discarded clay. I am unfinished clay. I am not a mistake. I am in the hands of the Master, and my story is not finished. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ, amen.